Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena, and we'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue. And finally, we'll share some ways that you can get involved. Today's guest is Ann Poirier, mother of four, one with Down syndrome, and a board member of Gigi's Playhouse in Cincinnati, and a disabilities advocate. Welcome, Ann, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Ann, today's topic is going to be mostly about abortion and Down syndrome and the awful way that Down syndrome is even presented, mostly to expecting families, that leads to completely, of course, all abortions are unnecessary, but completely unnecessary abortions in this country and even across the world. So abortions and Down syndrome. So, Ann, how did you get involved then in this ministry?
Well, I got involved in this ministry about 7 years ago when I had my daughter, Alice, and she has Down syndrome. We had a diagnosis of Down syndrome for her when she was born. We have always been pro-life, so we opted out of all the testing when I was pregnant. And so we ended up getting her diagnosis of Down syndrome when she was about an hour old. And that was a big shock, but it was what led me into this ministry of disability ministry.
I'm well aware that people do testing for Down syndrome, and then that can be, in the state of Ohio, that is actually against the law to abort simply for the reason of Down syndrome in the state of Ohio. Yeah, I know it was in Ohio. I just don't know if that has changed with issue 1 recently. But anyway, so I bring that up because is that the primary reason that people want to do that testing, or is there a secondary reason that also would be there could be helpful preparation for bringing a child with Down syndrome into the home if you know that in advance? Or is that at infancy, there's really isn't that kind of preparation necessary?
I remember them asking me that question when I was pregnant if I wanted to do the test prenatally. And in my mind at the time, I thought the only reason you would test would be to get an abortion if it came
Right.
back positive. And so I thought, no, I don't need to test. But you're right. A lot of people do that test in order to be prepared prenatally and get connected to services and get connected to other people and things like that. I just didn't know that at the time, but you're right. A lot of people do that, and then they end up, when the birth comes along, they feel so much more prepared and more connected, and like they have the resources that they need once that baby is born. So you're right. A lot of people do that.
Yeah, it could be obviously, so there could be good reasons for doing the testing, but
Hmm.
if that kind of testing is going to make one feel pressured to make a decision about the value of that child's life, right, then
Hmm.
it probably is not a good decision to even open up that door, right? But
Right.
if you know you're not going to do that and you're just trying to prepare as best as you can for the child that's going to be born, there obviously could be some value in that. So anyway, so you knew you didn't want to do any testing because you knew you weren't going to consider abortion, and then you find out that your child has Down syndrome within the first hour. What did you know about Down syndrome at that moment, and what was that moment like?
We knew absolutely nothing.
Right.
We were very uneducated about Down syndrome. That moment was the biggest shock of our lives. I remember just crying. The only person I knew who had a child with Down syndrome at that time was somebody when I was growing up, there was a family in my church who had a little boy with Down syndrome. And I remember seeing him in church, and his mom was a special ed teacher. And I remember when he was born, and my mom told me, oh, they had a little boy and he has Down syndrome. And I remember thinking, that's so perfect for them because she's a special ed teacher. But I could never have a baby with Down syndrome. I
Mm.
distinctly remember thinking that. And I was so uneducated about disability. I was uneducated about Down syndrome. I was uncomfortable with it. I purposely avoided going into a field like that with my career. I went into journalism. My husband did not know anyone with Down syndrome. So we were shocked and we were completely terrified. And the reason for that is because of our own ignorance. It wasn't anything to do with our daughter. it was everything to do with us and our own lack of knowledge. And we didn't know what we didn't know at the time.
Right. So were you immediately put into contact with people that could be very helpful to you right away?
We were told when she was about an hour old, we think she has Down syndrome based on some of her features. And then they gave us a folder from our local Down Syndrome Association. And it was like this thick folder of information with papers and charts and all this stuff. And they said,
Probably overwhelming.
oh,
Yeah.
so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And the doctor who told us that she thought she had Down syndrome gave us this folder and left the room. And there was contact information in the folder. And I just remember thinking, there is no way I'm calling someone right now. And so it was a lot. I would say the first like week was just a lot of completely overwhelm and just trying to figure out what to even do from there.
Right. I guess at some point, right, you must have been put in contact with people, or you contacted someone, or they contacted you, and and so a little bit about that. And what did you learn, and how did that all go?
Obviously, everybody knows you're pregnant and everybody knows you're having a baby. And so my husband and I both have really big families, and we have lots of friends and extended families and everything. And so we're getting bombarded with all these people, boy or girl, send us pictures, all this stuff. And Down syndrome is an interesting one because it's a diagnosis they wear on their face,
Right.
right? And so when you send pictures, to me, she was just a beautiful baby and I didn't
Right.
see Down syndrome, but the doctor had seen Down syndrome right away. And so it's one of those where like you want to send pictures, but you almost have to say she has Down syndrome right away because you don't want to send a picture and then they're
The
guessing,
people,
oh, does she have
yeah,
Down syndrome? And
right, right.
and and so it puts you in an interesting position. So I remember just sending an email to everybody, friends, family, my husband's family, friends, everybody, and just including a picture and just saying, she has Down syndrome. We don't know anything about Down syndrome. We're going to learn. Please keep us in your prayers, all of that. And what happened was everybody emailed back and texted me and called me, and it was like this flood of people saying, oh my gosh, my neighbor has Down syndrome. My cousin has Down syndrome. My student has Down, whatever it was, all these people. And just what a blessing these people had been to them. And it was mind blowing to me. I was able to reach out to all these people that my friends and family knew and start meeting their loved ones with Down syndrome. And just all of a sudden, I had this huge network of people who I could reach out to and be like, what do I do now? What services do I get connected to? What does she need? And I could meet little girls with Down syndrome and just see how cute and capable and wonderful they were. And so it was just like such a blessing, like right there from the start, that we got the privilege of having.
Can you tell us a little bit about Alice?
Yeah, she's 7. She's in second grade. She is super outgoing, super talkative. She loves attention. She loves to dance, loves to sing. My oldest daughter, she's 10 and she's very shy and introverted. And then Alice is very the opposite of that.
I was like, my girls.
She just did a play at her school and she was front center and just singing and dancing and just life of the party, loves life. And she's in speech class, but her speech is really good. She talks really well. And so she's doing really well.
What kind of services did you need as she was growing up and trying to go to school? And is there a serious lack of what is needed offered by schools for that, or did that go well? Do you have to constantly fight to get what you need?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I was really scared about when we first got her diagnosis was like I knew that people with Down syndrome back in the 50s and before or had been institutionalized. And that terrified me because I thought, oh my gosh, how horrible must this be that they were once institutionalized? This must be awful. Or this must be a horrible thing that I'm about to embark on where I'm going to have to fight tooth and nail for every single thing where to get her and every service. And it's been so the opposite of that, where there have clearly been parents before me who have done the hard work to advocate for services because it's such a streamlined process where there's a program, Help Me Grow, in Ohio, where birth to 3, every child with special needs qualifies for Help Me Grow. And so there's a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, and a physical therapist who will come to your house free of charge and work with that child as much or as little as needed and help them stay on track. So Alice was working with a physical therapist from when she was born to when she was 3 years old. I think she came twice a month and kind of helped to make sure that she was crawling when she needed to crawl and walking when she needed to walk and all of that. And so she hit her milestones, a little bit later than typical kids, but not anything wild. And she really did hit everything right when she should for a child with Down syndrome. And I think that helped her so much. And it was just nice to have eyes on her from somebody who knew Down syndrome so well.
Right. So that with the parents that I've talked to as well, who have children with Down syndrome, I've heard the same thing. I've heard that we're pretty good with,
Yeah.
resources out in that direction, of course. So that's good to know. So when did you get a hold of Gigi's Playhouse and what is that about and what kind of ministry that they offer?
So Gigi's Playhouse, it's a Down syndrome achievement center. It's a place that was started about 20 years ago by a woman who has a daughter with Down syndrome named Gigi. And when Gigi was born, her mom, Nancy, felt like there weren't enough places to celebrate her daughter or help her daughter achieve things in the world. And so her mom, Nancy, started a place for her called Gigi's Playhouse in Chicago where they live. And it took off. And so now there are about 70 places all across the country, 70 Gigi's Playhouses. And so when Alice was about 3 years old, I joined the startup team to help bring one to Cincinnati. And so a couple moms in the area, we joined together and we made a startup team to do some fundraising and make some connections and find a place. And we opened up in 2022. So we have our place in Loveland now, and we offer free programs and classes for children and adults with Down syndrome, kind of making sure that they are on track and that they're included and that they have a place they can go to always feel like they have a place where they're celebrated.
Okay, Ann, well, if you'd like, I can call up the website of Gigi's Playhouse. You said it was a national organization, but there's a local website, right? So that would be at gigisplayhouse.org/Cincinnati. And here we go. Obviously, if you're listening on the podcast, again, that is at gigisplayhouse.org/Cincinnati. If you're watching the video, you can see it here on the screen. Keeping in mind that some people are listening, driving in the car. Ann, you want to walk us through a little bit about what you can find on this website?
Yeah, so it's gigisplayhouse.org/Cincinnati, and you can find everything on there from our programs. Our programs range everything from birth all the way through adulthood. So we have everything for each age group. You can also find opportunities to volunteer. We offer service hours for high school and college age students. You can also volunteer, obviously, if you're an adult. You can also find our calendar on there. So you can see what programs are happening at which times. We usually do 3 big fundraising events every year. We have a gala that happens in February. We have a 5K that usually happens in June. And then we usually have a golf outing. Yeah, so our gala is happening on Saturday, February 28th. That will be at the Manor House in Mason. And it will be
Now, this is the 28th Playhouse Destination Discovery Gigi Fit Adult Gigi's Kitchen. I don't see it on the calendar. Maybe
yeah,
there's
so
not
it
a way
would
to get there.
probably be if you scroll up and you click on events
Okay.
and then you click on gala. Yep.
There
Click
we
on
go. Since it's coming up in February, I think that timing is pretty good for the release of this podcast. Can you tell me about the gala? We'll find it on events and then there it's on the gala. It looks like it's February 28th. What is it and can anybody join it and what happens there?
Yeah, so our annual gala is coming up on Saturday, February 28th. It's at the Manor House in Mason, and anyone is welcome to come. You can just go to our website, gigisplayhouse.org/Cincinnati/gala, and you can buy tickets there. You can donate auction items, you can make a sponsorship, look at pictures from our past galas. But it's a really fun event. We're trying to get 300 tickets sold this year. And we have auctions, raffles, dinner, drinks, dancing, and from 6 to 10 p.m. at the Manor House in Mason. And we just celebrate the extra luck of people with Down syndrome.
Great. That sounds fantastic. So anybody could register if they want to be a part of this. That's right.
Yep,
All
that's
right.
correct.
Awesome. Anything else? Because I interrupted you when you brought up the gala. Is there anything else on this website we want to talk about while we're here? So you said calendar events. You could sign up to support. There's a donation button on here, or you can volunteer. Anything else to point out with on this website?
Gigi's, like I said, is a national organization. So almost every state in the United States has a Gigi's. So you can go to gigisplayhouse.org and find a location near you, and they all offer very similar programs.
So there's one in Cincinnati. Or so what else do we have in Ohio? Is there one in Dayton or near Dayton? Other people in our listening area.
There's not one in Dayton. There are 3 in Ohio. There's one in Canton and one in Cleveland. And then there's one in Indianapolis as well.
And I want to bring up a topic. I'm the director of the Respect Life office here in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and also of the Disabilities office here. And it was at first it was the Respect Life office, and then in 2017 or 2018, around that time, the big story came out from Iceland. I believe it was Iceland, basically bragging that they have eradicated Down syndrome in that country. And what that means is they were doing prenatal testing on every pregnant woman, and they were encouraging abortion if you have a prenatal test of Down syndrome. That is not eradicating Down syndrome. That is simply killing people who have Down syndrome. So I said, okay, that it became readily apparent to me that being pro-life, not that it ever was not, but it became readily apparent to me that being pro-life is completely hand in hand with helping families, right, who have children or adults with disabilities, right? And so that moved us in the direction of getting another office together. So which is what you're here to talk about. So talk a little bit with me about, I guess, the misinformation or the poor education or the attitude about disabilities and Down syndrome that's out there in the world and in this country that we need to change to advocate for children with Down syndrome and disabilities.
Yeah, those statistics make me so sad because I know what it's like to get that diagnosis
Right.
and the fear that you have when you get that diagnosis because of being misinformed. And so my heart goes out to the women who get that diagnosis and then are immediately told you can get an abortion and avoid this. And I feel for them because to them it must sound like, oh, this is an answer to a problem. But it's not a problem. Down syndrome is such a solution. And having my daughter has taught me that. You know, we think about disabilities as a problem, and they're not. When I first had her, I had like this revelation of after a while, like, okay, it's going to be okay. And then now I got to the point of like, it's way more than okay. Like, it's actually amazing. And she has it figured out. You know, like we need to learn from her. The people with Down syndrome, they have it figured out. They know what's important. And for us to be killing them is just wrong because I believe that God's sending them to us to teach us what is important. And so I think it's so important for us to change the narrative of how that diagnosis is presented. And if it's presented in a way where we say, you know what, your baby has Down syndrome, but you can get an abortion. How is that mom supposed to feel? Of
Right.
course, she's going to be fearful. Of course, she's going to say, oh my gosh, maybe I should do that. But if she's instead presented it, your baby has Down syndrome, but this is going to be great. And you're going to learn so much. And I know this is news you weren't expecting, but let me connect you with all these other moms who also have a child with Down syndrome. And let me connect you with all these other resources. And let me connect you with this Gigi's Playhouse that's local. And let me show you this child with Down syndrome who's doing amazing things. It's all about the way you present it. But I think if you say to them, your child has Down syndrome, and then you show them these statistics of eradicating it, they're going to be so terrified. And I just think there's so much that we need to change in terms of how it's presented and just what we're showing people in terms of what Down syndrome and disability really is. And that's what I've learned with my daughter is I get her out there as much as I can. I take her everywhere with me.
Right.
I show her to everybody. I have a blog where I post her face and I'm like, here she is. This is Down syndrome. And this is what it really looks like. Because I want people to know that there's nothing to be scared of. And if they ever get a diagnosis of Down syndrome for their child, there's nothing to fear. It's different than what they thought it was going to be, but it's just as fulfilling or maybe more so.
While a child with Down syndrome might have some more challenges, perhaps with academics than your neurotypical child, might have some other health issues that are common with Down syndrome that a typical child may not have. At the same time, like you were alluding to, they have a love, they have an understanding of relationship, they have a capacity for joy that seems to be way above average. They have an understanding of what's really important in life that all of us kind of have, that some of us kind of bury sometimes among life's concerns. They seem to have that up in the forefront much more easily for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
Than the rest of it. And every parent I've talked to says that makes it well worth the other challenges that, of course,
Yeah.
come at the same time, right?
Yeah.
If so, it sounds so what you're saying, I think, is that if that message could be relayed, then because yeah, if you're saying if you tell a mother, well, you can have an abortion, the implication, there's so many implications. One of them is that life doesn't have value in itself, but one of many implications there is that this is going to be so hard and so
Right.
crazy difficult that it's probably not worth going through. And then
Right.
everybody that does go through it says it's well worth it.
Right.
Um, okay. So, but Iceland was an example of practically 100%. What's the percentages of people who abort for Down syndrome in the United States? Do you know?
Yeah, it's about 60 to 70%.
60 to 70. Wow. See, I had no idea. That's way
Mm.
higher than I even would have expected.
Yeah. I looked that up after we had my daughter. I kind of stumbled upon it because I was researching Down syndrome after we had her. And I went into there were groups online about Down syndrome, and some of them were about like support groups
Right.
after you had an abortion because of Down syndrome. And it was awful.
All right, and I always like to end the podcast with talking a little bit about how the listener, right, can get involved. We already talked a little bit about Gigi's Playhouse. If you were driving this whole time, right, and forgot to write it down, it's Gigis, gigisplayhouse.org/Cincinnati. That's how you find the local address, and you can again look up the date of that coming gala, February 28th, and get more information on that. But what are other ways that the regular person in the pew, as we say, can get involved in and help people understand the value of children and adults who have Down syndrome or other disabilities?
Yeah, so you can always look up Gigi's Playhouse. You can always look up your local Down Syndrome Association. I know they always need volunteers, and that's a great way to connect with other people with Down syndrome as well. Also, if you have a child who is in school with somebody with Down syndrome, encourage them to sit with that child at lunch and make sure to include that child at school. And if you have a volunteer opportunity anywhere where there's a person with a disability, try to do that. And I think you will probably get more out of it than that person will.
Right. So, Anne, I know, for example, when I have had the topic of adoption on this podcast, there are parents who have children who are placed in their home through adoption, and there are things that people say just out of ignorance that shouldn't be said, right? That they just don't know how to talk about the topic in front of the child or in front of the parents. Are there tips like that that people should know that they should or should not say, or what not to be afraid to say, these kinds of things if they see a family or they know a family who has a child with Down syndrome?
That's a great question. Here's one thing that I will say about that. When we had Alice, my daughter with Down syndrome, I felt like people were uncomfortable asking questions because they didn't want to ask the wrong question. And what I would say is ask your question, even if you may be unsure of how to ask it or may be afraid you're going to offend or something like that. Ask it because I could tell people were uncomfortable, and I just wish people would just kind of ask their questions and then we could kind of clear the air. And I could just tell that sometimes people would want to ask questions and they wouldn't know how to, so they wouldn't ask. And so I think it's just one of those things where you just have to ask and get it out there, and then it's not so awkward anymore. Because I think sometimes people just don't know how to ask because they don't ask.
All right, Ann. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today on the show, helping people understand not only the beauty of all life of children with disabilities, but specifically the joy of having a child with Down syndrome and how it is that people can get involved in Gigi's Playhouse or in other ways to help all people to understand the beauty of all life. Thanks for coming on the show, Ann.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website to view all the links talked about in this episode at www.catholicaoc.org/beingprolife. Thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to being with you next time.